Welcome to the Blogging and SEO Show. I'm Michaela, a stay-at-home mom of 3 who just happens to be in love with everything related to SEO, blogging, marketing, coffee, and shedding light into the many mystifying corners of search engine optimization, and what that means for us service providers, small business owners, and even bloggers. We're ditching the do-it-all narrative surrounding SEO and blogging and just sitting down and crafting strategies that are sustainable but still get us those first-page, long-lasting results. Now let's get cozy, grab your fave sweater and a cup of tea or coffee, and let's talk everything blogging and SEO. Hello, and welcome back to the Blogging and SEO Show. I am Michaela, and I am the exhausted mom behind the scenes. For some reason, the flu has decided to come through our household, and it left nobody untouched. So we have all suffered for weeks. But I feel like that brings an even stronger point to why Google and SEO are important, because even though I spent multiple nights taking care of my littles, myself, and even my husband, because when I say it did not leave any of us untouched, it took us all out, continued to help me show up. So just testament to what Google can do, also just testament of what the flu can do, I guess. But that brings us to today's episode. We're talking the surprisingly simple way to get your podcast found on Google. Because fun fact, your podcast, and I'm speaking to podcasters here, and if you do not have a podcast, this episode is probably not for you. There's still some good stuff here, but this is kind of specifically for my podcasters, mainly because Google does not index your audio. So when you take an episode and you publish it on your show, and it publishes to these platforms, you know, it goes to Apple, it goes to Spotify, it goes to wherever, it can be found on that platform. And technically, that episode can be found on Google by that platform. So, for example, if I were to look up your episode title and your show name on Google, it would likely bring me to your episode and show hosted on one of those platforms. There are some exceptions. So like if you have already been blogging or you have a podcast landing page, which that's important too, then I might be able to find that. But otherwise, I will not be able to find that episode. And the reason is the audio is not indexed. So all Google has to work off of is your show notes. And ranking for your show notes on a platform that massive is hard. Google does not prioritize, at least in my experience. Now, there's always exceptions to a rule, and I'm willing to admit that. In my experience, Google does not tend to prioritize podcasts and ranking, at least not on podcasting platforms. If I find a podcast, or even if you find a podcast in Google, when you are not specifically searching for a podcast, you've likely found it because of a blog post, because the blog post was a repurposed version of the podcast. So that is how you're going to get your podcast found on Google, and that is by repurposing it into an SEO optimized blog post. And I know SEO means search engine optimized, but it is a phrase, and it is so ingrained in SEO and like talking about SEO that we're just going to roll with it, okay? But that's how you're going to get found on Google. And before you think, okay, but I'm a podcaster, I'm not a writer, or I'm a podcaster, I really don't want to spend that time blogging too. It is not as complicated as it seems. You don't know what you don't know. So when you go into doing this repurposing process, it seems a lot more intimidating than it actually is. And the reason is you've already created your main piece of content. You have already created this core piece of content, and you're just trying to put it in a readable, consumable way for readers. Like for anybody who just stumbles upon the text, because it is two different audiences. You're reaching for one. When someone listens to your podcast, they're expecting to listen. They're expecting to sit down and listen to your show. They saw the notification pop up because they're subscribed, or maybe you shared it on social media and they're like, yeah, this episode is definitely for me. And so they head over and they're prepared to listen to it. And by listen to it, I mean they're like driving or multitasking, because most people who listen to podcasts are multitasking, versus when someone sits down and reads a blog post. Now, blog posts are discovered in different ways, so it doesn't require you to share the link on your Instagram, and it doesn't require somebody to subscribe and get the notification. People can see your blog when they're searching for it. So, for example, if you are a podcast manager and you record an episode about how to start a podcast with no audience, you can turn that into a blog post and people can search, how do I start a podcast with no audience? And they'll find that blog post before they will ever find that podcast episode if they are not already in your circle. So if they are not already in your space. So you're opening up an entirely new place in that space by repurposing. And like I said, you've already created that core content. So you're just putting it into another format. So you're just editing, shaping, and just tweaking for your readers. And before you wonder, like, well, is my podcast really ready to be on Google? It is. I mean, you would be surprised, even if you're like, maybe this is a newer industry or newer niche, even more potential on Google. Even more, I promise you. You just have to find the right keywords. You have to find the right ways people are searching, because people are searching for either the problems that you solve or the offer that you have. You just have to position yourself to be found in that way. And no, copy and pasting your transcript or your show notes is not going to cut it. And that's mainly because it's not meant for readers. Your show notes are meant for people who are intending to listen. And your transcript is generated by a bot, essentially. And it does get a lot of things wrong. And nobody really wants to read a giant block of text. It is not how our brains work. We will not consume information that way, and it will definitely not stick with us. So it's just a bad route to go. Also, when we talk on podcasts, we tend to get a little bit more personal. We take up a little bit more time. We tell stories. We add in our personal anecdotes, and that's awesome. But when people go to read, sometimes that doesn't translate well, and it can be more confusing than it is helpful or valuable. So there's no purpose for it in the post. So part of learning how to repurpose is learning what needs to stay and what needs to go for readers versus listeners. And the cool part is you can still keep your episode embedded in your blog post. So when people land on it, they can choose to listen, even if they were not expecting to listen, because that does happen. You do have people who do have more time on their hands because they're not needing to focus on one sole task right now. They can multitask. Maybe they're walking around in their house, or they're sitting at their desk, or doing whatever they want to do. And they're like, yeah, maybe a podcast would be a good option right now. Then they do have that option. So I'm not saying that they'll never consume that content. You may even get podcast subscribers and followers from the blog post, which is awesome. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your podcast is your purpose. And I say that because we have to think about like our end goal for this. And this does tie back to like getting your podcast found on Google, because when Google indexes a page and ranks a page, it's showing that it's valuable to its searchers. And to make something valuable, we have to remember our end goal. So we have to remember our end goal. And sometimes we kind of lose sight of that because we get super hype about our content and we're like, yeah, listen to the podcast. But when you are translating or repurposing rather your podcast episodes into blog posts, when you're doing that, you have to remember your end goal. So is your end goal to get podcast listeners? Or is your end goal to get more clients? Like whether or not they listen to your podcast, as long as they're consuming your content and they want to work with you, like, is that the end goal? Is it, or replace clients with subscribers or group members or product buy? So what is that end goal versus just listening to the podcast? Your podcast is just like a handy little helper for creating this. And it's like a codependent relationship almost, because your podcast will not be found on Google, at least not easily, without a blog post, but your blog post content would not exist without your podcast episode. So it's like codependent relationship here. Anyway, so getting into how that actually helps you show up. Honestly, it's a lot of consistency. And by consistency, I do not mean posting once a week. That's not consistency. That is posting once a week. Consistency and the way that I'm talking about it just means finding a routine or process or cadence. That's a good word. Or cadence for how it will work for you. So whether that's like once a month, 3 times a month, 4 times a month, or once a quarter, like that's fine. And it's fine because you can be strategic about the podcast episodes that you repurpose. You don't have to repurpose every single episode. You can do some research, do some keyword research, find out what's ranking best, and repurpose those specific episodes, the ones that you're going to get a really good ROI on your time. And it takes a little practice to be able to find those because you are working with a non-negotiable, because you've already created your episode. So unless you did your keyword research before you created your episode, you don't really have a lot of wiggle room in that aspect. So you're trying to find the best fit. And sometimes even the best fit isn't going to be like the golden keyword of the world. It is what it is. And you just have to recognize that, okay, if I spend more time on keyword research, is it really going to align with my episode? Or am I just putting more time into this when I could either just go ahead and repurpose it and just live with it and move on, or skip this episode and move on to another episode? That's also part of the strategy. But I feel like I got a little bit off topic there. This is one of those topics that I could probably talk about for forever and go off on little tangents multiple times. Or maybe that's just how I exist, is just existing in tangents, which is funny. No, I'm pretty sure my mom did say that I could talk forever, but high school I was super quiet. Maybe? Or that might just be my point of view. Who knows? But there's so much to consider and so much to learn. But the actual process, once you get a good workflow for yourself worked out, it's not too bad. Once you can recognize like, okay, this is what's going to go here. This is going to go here. And it really is breaking it down, looking at the structure, looking at what your people need to know versus like being a good writer. Of course, there's some SEO skills and like recognizing keywords and doing your keyword research, and the structure goes into your SEO as well. But ultimately, yeah, that's going to be the winner there. So that is how your podcast is going to get found on Google. And honestly, in all the marketing things in the world, I don't think that's the most complicated thing ever. I think that's a pretty simple thing. You just take the content you already have that you've already recorded, put it into a different format, put it on your website, wait some time, tweak your strategy, and boom, you can be found on Google. But that is it for today. I hope that you found this episode helpful. Pod to Blog is still open. So my Pod to Blog program, a 12-week program for podcasters, teaching you how to take your episodes and turn them into SEO blog posts within your capacity, helping you throughout the entire process. So there's no trial and error. If there is, I've got your back, and you're going to figure out how to get the best ROI in your time so that your content can continue to work for you for literal years. No more getting buried beneath all your most recent episodes. They're all going to get their chance to shine, and they're all going to shine for freaking forever through SEO. So the link is in the show notes. I'm only taking 12 students for this round. So save your spot. We start in April, and I'm honestly just super excited. I've put a lot of time and effort into this curriculum and making sure that you will get the absolute most out of spending this time essentially learning how to get more out of your time. But yeah, that's it for today. Talk to you, I'm thinking in 2 weeks. We're kind of changing to like a bi-weekly format for a little bit. My life's a little crazy. Apparently 3 children, 5 and under, is a lot to juggle along with business. So we will be switching to bi-weekly, at least for the moment. But you will hear my wonderful voice in 2 weeks. Bye. As always, I hope you were able to learn at least one new thing today and how you can apply it to your own business or blog. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Blogging and SEO Show. Don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss the next episode. I promise it's a goodie. And check the show notes for everything we talked about today. And come connect with me on Instagram at comamama.co. If you have any questions or thoughts you want to share, DM me. Let's chat. Until next time, talk soon.